Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Peter Florence. I'm the director of the... Sorry, I'm rather hoarse after this morning. I'm the director of the Hay Festival. We gave our speaker today the Hay Festival Medal for Journalism this year. Many of the people who speak at Hay, the poets and the novelists, tell intimate, private truths that we all know to be true. This journalist tells great big stonking global truths that are true and important. It's wonderful to have some of those truths aired in this beautiful chamber. And I'm delighted that we're chaired today by the journalist Oliver Bullough, whose book Moneyland is one of the great interrogations of capital and the way it moves around the world. Our speaker's forensic and persistent investigation can be likened and will be likened, I think, in time to come to Woodward and Bernstein, but also her resilience in the face of a relentless and extraordinarily ugly onslaught of reaction kind of sits her up there with the other great resident of Chepstow, Martha Gellhorn. It is wonderful to have her here. I know that you're going to have a really interesting hour where there will be a lecture, there will be conversation and time for questions, and I ask you to join me in giving a very warm welcome to the great Carole Cadwalladr.
So thank you so much to the GWLAD Festival and the Welsh Assembly and the Hay Festival and whoever else was involved inviting me here today. I'm terribly honoured to speak on the 20th anniversary of the Senedd and to return to Cardiff, where I grew up and which I'm very proud of coming from. And I'm old enough to remember when this was all the desolate Badlands. And it's just amazing to see how the city and the country has changed in the last 20 years. And so I understand there's been some statements made, some of them in this chamber, by certain members of the Brexit Party, who've noted how unhappy they are that I have been asked to come and talk today. So I just want to say that I very much hope that I'll give them cause to be even unhappier by the end of this. Because I'm here today putting myself through the not inconsiderable stress of giving a lecture when I have never given a lecture before in my life. Because we are at this critical moment in our country's history. In just a few weeks, the future of Wales is going to change forever. And I am here to urge the Welsh Assembly and the Welsh people to speak up and to at least try and hold power to account. So I want to start by telling you a story. So many years ago, I was a cub reporter at the Daily Telegraph, and there was a story about something in Wales, and I asked my editor if I could cover it. And so he was thinking about it and looking a bit doubtful, and I said to him, "You do have readers in Wales, you know." And I said that because my father, a true Welshman, who you didn't tell him how to think, he used to read the Western Mail and the South Wales Echo and the Daily Telegraph. And he liked the Telegraph the best because he used to say, "You need to know how the other buggers are thinking." Although my mum, who is here somewhere today, banished up there somewhere, she said it was because it had the easiest cryptic crossword. Anyway, my editor thought about this for a moment, this idea of readers in Wales, and then he shook his head and he said, "Yes, but we try not to encourage them." So this was a joke, but like all jokes, it had a little bit of truth to it, because the Telegraph at that time did not have a correspondent in Wales at any time, because the Telegraph is like every other national newspaper in Britain, who I believe there isn't one who has a correspondent here. And because the national media, which is the London media, Wales doesn't really exist. It is barely reported on. In Scotland, there are different editions of the papers which come out there. They even have their own editors. But Wales, you only really hear about it if a steel plant shuts, or if there's a random killing, but it has to be like a really juicy one. or if there's a funny story, but hopefully involving sheep. So believe me when I say that Wales does not matter. Not to the national media, not to Westminster, and not to central government. Because the people who really rule Britain, the foreign billionaires who own the press, and the financial services and the hedge funds who dominate the city and whose voices are listened to, who pay to be listened to, they literally don't give a shit about you, or me, or any of us. And even the liberal bleeding heart media, of which I count myself among, we have failed you too. Because there have always been problems with the British press. It's temperamentally right-wing. It's owned by foreigners or people who keep their money offshore. But in the 1990s, it got so much worse. And that is because of the exciting new invention, the internet. So I started my newspaper career right here in Wales, aged 12, as a paper girl for the South Wales Echo. And I delivered the Echo 6 days a week for 6 years, barely missing a day, apart from one memorable occasion when I had a really, really bad poodle perm, and I refused to leave the house, and my mum did it for me, bless her. It was the 80s, remember? But it was actually a very profitable little business. It kept me in drainpipe jeans and poodle perms because everyone read the Echo, or at least about a third to half the village did. And that's because it mattered, because it did this job of reporting the news, and because it was also the go-to place where you bought a house or a car or a second-hand wardrobe, because of the pages and pages of classified ads which sustained its business. But the ads, they disappeared, they went online. And with the ads went the journalists. And I'm going to give you a graphic example of why I think that matters. And that's Grenfell Tower. Because Grenfell's residents tried time and again to sound the alarm. They wrote letters and blogs, but there was nobody to hear them. There used to be 2 fully staffed newspapers in Kensington, the local borough, and now there are none. Grenfell wasn't an accident. It was systemic institutional failure that was decades in the making. And if you take that problem of a single London borough and you expand that to an entire country, you have Wales, a country that has suffered deep systemic problems over decades. And whilst there is broadcast media here within Wales, excellent BBC Wales and ITV Wales, and there's Wales Online and there's Western Mails, it's not enough, not least because these are only heard within Wales. And outside, Welsh problems and Welsh people and Welsh voices are not heard. Brexit is not Grenfell Tower, but it is a moment when our country is going to change forever. And we know that Brexit will make Wales and the Welsh poorer. We've received £5 billion since 2000, £680 million a year. And who is going to replace that? Does anybody in Wales seriously think that Boris Johnson is going to replace that? But the Brexiteers were right about one thing. Brexit is about taking back control. It's about English nationalists taking back control. Just look at Nigel Farage and how over 20 years he bled hundreds of thousands of pounds from within the European Parliament. And he did that in order to try and destroy it from within. And that's what UKIP have also tried to do here in Wales, inside this very chamber. Because I want to tell you another story. I came here to this chamber in 2016 because I wanted to write about the shock victory of this far-right fringe party and its first major success in a British legislature. But I didn't write this article. And the reason I didn't write it is because none of them would speak to me. And the spokesman said to me, he said, "You're not a friendly paper." And I said, "Yeah, you know, it's too right." Because it was The Guardian who exposed Neil Hamilton, a liar and a cheat, it famously said. A liar and a cheat who represents Mid and West Wales from his £1.5 million manor house in Wiltshire. So Hamilton wouldn't talk to me, just as Farage won't answer my questions. These are public servants paid out of public money who refuse to be publicly accountable. And Farage and Hamilton, they've got away with this because the money that should pay for journalists to hammer away at these questions day after day is sitting in Mark Zuckerberg's bank account. Facebook and Google have destroyed the financial basis of how journalism works. And into this vacuum has come fake news and disinformation and propaganda. So I was in Ebbw Vale on the day after the Brexit vote. And I didn't know then anything about this world of disinformation. But I've spent 3 years trying to understand it, trying to understand how voters in Wales were specially selected, how their data was harvested, how they were politically profiled, and then they were targeted. And because at the same time that Google and Facebook were destroying the newspaper industry, it also created this set of mass manipulation tools on a scale that the world has never seen before. And there are people who try and poo-poo this. So Nick Clegg, our ex-Deputy Prime Minister, he's now Facebook's head of global communications. He literally polices disinformation on Facebook's platform. He's told me to my face that it's a conspiracy theory to suggest this, which is kind of interesting because it's literally the basis of Facebook's business model and a $100 billion a year digital advertising industry. So what I have come to understand most of all is how these technology platforms were used to break British laws, multiple laws. And I haven't got time to go into all of it. So I just want to talk about 2 individuals involved. And that is our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and his chief advisor, Dominic Cummings. And how their campaign, Vote Leave, broke the law. And it didn't just break the law, it set out to deliberately break the law. So just days before the Brexit vote, the Vote Leave campaign was approaching its spending limits. And these are the bedrock of our elections. They're there to ensure that our elections are a level playing field, that they're free and fair. But because we're British and we believe in fair play, we also trust campaigns to report their spending after the event. We expect them to behave like gentlemen. And this was critical. So there's a book by a journalist called Tim Shipman, and it's all set down in there. He writes about how the campaign spent £1.5 million in the last week on Facebook ads. And we know, and he says, this is a quote from him. He said, "Vote Leave were so keen to throw money at social media that in the final days of the campaign, they took the questionable step of donating £675,000 to a 23-year-old fashion student called Darren Grimes. And the timing of the donations meant that they knew they didn't have to be declared until after the result was known." And it says, if the campaigns were working together, the money would have to count towards Vote Leave's £7 million spending limit. But the Electoral Commission would have to prove that Vote Leave told Darren Grimes how to spend that money. And so that was a strategic plan. It's just down there in black and white. And it involved 1/7 of the entire campaign budget. And this illegality, it was not an accident. This was totally deliberate. And it's the quote, if the campaigns were working together, it would break the law, but the Electoral Commission would have to prove it. So they pretty much almost got away with it. But they didn't, because this man, Shamir Sani, who's one of the bravest people I know, he spoke his conscience. He's had this massive effect on his life, but he exposed the biggest case of electoral fraud in Britain for more than 100 years. This is fraud. If you commit this level of fraud in any other area of British life, you go to jail. But not in Britain in 2019. If you commit this level of fraud in Britain in 2019, you become Prime Minister. And people say to me, well, OK, they broke the law, so what? There's no evidence that it made any difference. And so you wonder, if it's OK to break that law, our most important law, the one which protects the fabric of our democracy, then what next? Is it OK to nick cars or mug old ladies or illegally shut down Parliament? Is that OK? And there's just one graph I want to show, this idea that the money had no effect. So this is from The Economist. And can you see that's the Leave and Remain lines? And it switches for just a couple of days, literally, before the referendum. It switches. So it's those last few days were absolutely pivotal. And that's what Dominic Cummings knew. You just have to change a few minds for a very short amount of time, and that's enough. So this matter is now, it's in the hands of the Met Police. But I believe that you here, all of us, that we deserve answers, and I don't believe we're going to get them. 2 weeks ago, the Met Police dropped another investigation into another campaign, that of Leave.eu, and it gave no reason at all why. Nothing. No statement, no explanation, nothing. Arfon Jones, he's the North Wales Police and Crime Commissioner. He's demanded that actually we do need answers. He has asked the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners to write to Cressida Dick, the head of the Met Police. You might have heard of her because Boris Johnson gave her an honour in the latest list. And he's asked other police forces to scrutinise this. And he's right, because the Met Police is not your police. It's London's police force. It answers to the London Assembly, the body which was headed by Boris Johnson till recently. But these crimes weren't committed in London. They were also committed in Wales. And they are going to affect the Welsh people forever. And so I would like to ask why this Assembly has made no attempt to call the perpetrators of these crimes to account. These people who are now literally sitting in Downing Street. Because this deafening silence has enabled other crimes. This week, the Supreme Court ruled it was unlawful of Boris Johnson to shut Parliament. We now know that he lied to the Queen. And we now know that both he and Dominic Cummings have said that we are leaving on October the 31st by whatever means possible. And I think we have to understand what that means. So just let me say it one more time. These people literally do not care about Wales. They have lied and they have cheated and they have exploited loopholes created by the immoral and reckless disregard of Silicon Valley companies. By Mark Zuckerberg, who is a gutless coward who has refused to come to Britain and to answer questions to our Parliament. So I get asked why I have bothered for 3 years to keep banging away at this. And it's because I have done, me and my colleagues, and The Guardian and The Observer and a whole host of other news organisations. We have done what journalism is supposed to do. We have exposed the truth through whistleblowers like Christopher Wiley and Shamir Sani and multiple other brave individuals. And what we've discovered is that it is not possible in Britain in 2019 to hold power to account, or in America too, because Brexit and Trump are intimately entwined. Forget a Tory Brexit or the fantasy of a Labour Brexit. This is a Trump Brexit. So the one thing that gives me, I don't know, some sort of, I don't know, I was going to say hope, but that's the wrong word. I believe that one day we will know the truth. And when that day comes, I hope that everybody in Wales will be able to look back and feel okay about what happened here, about how we remained silent even as investigation after investigation revealed how these politicians, these English politicians, lied and cheated and broke the law in order to return England to the English nationalists. Brexit is a criminal act. We are staring the evidence in the face, and yet it is careering towards us as if it's an unstoppable train. It isn't. It just requires all of us to speak up and to be heard and to at least try to hold power to account. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. We were chatting beforehand, and she hadn't practiced her lecture before, and she was worried it was going to be too long, and I was saying, there is literally no one in this room who is going to mind if you keep talking for an hour. But I have some questions. I think there's a few things that people regularly come back to you with one of them, and I think it's an important one to get out of the way, is I'm not influenced by Facebook adverts.
You don't have to be.
So how does it work?
You don't have to be. I mean, I am influenced by Facebook adverts. I mean, I have a fake profile and it still knows like the kind of dresses I like to buy. I'm always going, oh yes, they got that one right. But you don't have to be influenced, because the thing is that you probably weren't the target. So anybody who's got a sort of like, you know, strong political opinions is unlikely to be the person who they're looking for, who they're profiling and who they're targeting. They're after that, just that really, really, really tiny number of people who aren't sure which way to vote. And, you know, they're called, it's the persuadables. Dominic Cummings writes at length about them. So it's the persuadables, that's who they're after. It's about 700,000 people. And it's also, they call them the shy voters. So the people who, wouldn't normally vote. And that was a really key demographic they went after. And they did that in this really conniving and I think, this illicit way. We're not sure if it's illegal, but they did this football competition. So you could win they said win £50 million by predicting the results of, I think it was the European Championships. And so lots of people who were interested in football did it, and it harvested their Facebook profile and their email and I think their telephone number. And then that information was used to target them right ahead of the referendum. You'd have had no idea about that at all.
So a second point is, like you say, there have been Metropolitan Police investigations, the Electoral Commission has looked at this, and they haven't come back with anything, so it's kind of...
the one into Vote Leave, specifically the one involving Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, that is still ongoing.
But I suppose my point is, I mean, I write about financial crime, and enforcement is not where it needs to be. It's maybe 1% of where it needs to be. How do you feel about just the general enforcement picture of this? That, you know, we have rules. Is there essentially any downside to breaking them, I suppose, is the point?
Well, that's what they figured out. I mean, Dominic Cummings is not stupid. I mean, you read up on electoral law and you look at it and you think, oh, it's a fine. Okay, well, it's just a cost of doing business, isn't it? And you know, we're in this just this incredibly vulnerable situation right now, because we are going to have a general election at some point in the near future. And you know, Parliament has said, this committee which did this really, really thorough report into all of this, and it said that our electoral laws don't work. They are not fit for purpose. And so we have absolutely no way at the moment of safeguarding our elections, which is sort of an incredible situation to be in. And yet there is total silence from the government on this.
It's a reassuring thing to know since we have a general election coming up. The third point I want to raise, everyone was doing it. Both sides, everyone's guilty.
Well, the thing is about that, it's a nice idea, but there was, I mean, and there has just been no evidence. And even if there was, you know, how does that make it any better? You know, if you've got both sides cheating, well, surely that's twice the reason why this should be thoroughly investigated. But, you know, that also just didn't happen to be true, that they tried to, there hasn't been any evidence of laws being broken by the other side.
Okay, having got my three things that get raised out of the way, I understand what Boris Johnson wants, or Dominic Cummings wants. They want power, and they want to be able to run the country and do what they want with it. To my mind, a more interesting question is, what is the desire of the people who fund them, the people who, you know, the hedge fund bosses who put these £625,000 to go to Darren Grimes or whatever, these huge amounts of money, and it was, you know, really a lot of money. What's the desire? You know, what do you have a sense of what, you know, because power is a means to an end, it's not an end. What's the end?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can just look at that and you can just be really cynical and say you make the markets make money when there's volatility. So it doesn't really, you can be really cynical and say they just, you know, we know that happened on the night of the Brexit vote, that the same people who donated to Boris Johnson's and Nigel Farage's campaign, they made billions on the night through speculating on sterling. And so that maybe they're not even interested in the political result, I don't know. But then you can see all sorts of reasons why they might be, why a lot of people see the opportunity post-Brexit. And that's people who, you know, things like exploiting the National Health Service. We know that's one of the things that is kind of up for grabs in any trade negotiation with the United States, for example. There are all sorts of opportunities for the sort of disaster capitalists here.
This last week, both Rachel Johnson, Boris Johnson's sister, and the ex-Chancellor, incredibly, Philip Hammond, came out with essentially what you're saying and what you've been saying for a long time, that there is this concern that essentially Number 10 is acting in the interest of their donors to create volatility so the hedge funds can make money. I mean, that's astonishing, right? That a former Chancellor has come out and said...
I mean, it's kind of, I know. And they were like, I know. He's a conservative ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer.
A man so boring they called him Spreadsheet Phil.
And just the thing that he's pointing out is that the people who are financially backing Boris Johnson are the people who could potentially benefit from this volatility. And it does make you curious about the fact that they're so resolute for October the 31st that they won't countenance any delay. And you do have to question whether there is something in there. I don't know, and I'm not a financial journalist. I'm not equipped to know, but...
You don't get people calling you up and giving you all these tips of what's really going on then?
I do get some funny tips. I knew about Boris Johnson's affair ahead of time.
Are we calling it an affair
I got into trouble about that, sorry.
Are we calling it an affair now? Are we actually...
A close friend, I'm so sorry.
Because I was under the impression he was just having technology lessons.
She was a close friend who his number was saved in her phone as... His real name is not Boris Johnson, you know, it's Alexander de Pfeffel Johnson, and his name was saved in the phone as Alexander the Great. Make of that what you will.
Oh, too much information. So, I suppose what's interesting, there has been a feeling in some of the media in the last week, because of the Supreme Court judgment and because of what's happening in the United States, that the tide is maybe turning populism. I suppose I was wondering whether this intervention from Philip Hammond, which is, kind of amazing, the fact that someone who was a Tory Chancellor until 3 months ago is coming to say this about the Tory government, Is this a? I mean, are we feeling a bit more optimistic than we were a week ago?
But you see, I think it goes back to these structural issues, which is the whole problem that has been in reporting this all the way through, which is our press is really partisan. And so this kind of like, it's only if this is going to get picked up by the right-wing press, by the Mail and the Sun and the Times, that then it becomes a story, and then it's, you know, and then the BBC pick it up. But if that doesn't happen, then it just dies on the vine. And, you know, that's why I just, you know, this thing with the whole thing of what happened with Shamir Sani and the way that he exposed that. And we thought, so when in the kind of incredible, stressful run-up to publishing both the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the Vote Leave spending scandal, we really thought that it was that one. It was Shamir's Sani's story, which was the one which was going to be really explosive. Because you could kind of argue the toss with some of the Cambridge Analytica stuff, but this was just so that we had folders and folders of evidence, and it was just really clear cut. It was really compelling. But then we reported it, and it really didn't travel. And I really do hold the BBC to account for that, because they had all the evidence. And I really feel that it's like when we look back, that the fact that that had no impact, that actually these allegations of massive illegality were not reported, I do think that has enabled Johnson and Cummings. They got away with it. And I think that the closure of Parliament is a direct consequence of that. And I think the fact that I think we all have to be aware that it is quite possible that they will break the law again to take us out of Europe on October the 31st. And again, I think it's this consequence of getting away with it.
I want to make sure there's time for all these wonderful people to ask questions as well. But just before I get to that, I totally agree with everything you said about local media, speaking as an alumnus of the Brecon and Radnor Express myself. But since it's true that they don't give a shit about us here, you know,
Is that a little bit over the top?
I don't think so.
I think it was fair.
Pretty accurate, to be honest. But yeah, so the question is, how do we change it so they do? What's the, you know, we need an action point, as they say in management seminars.
Well, I'd really like to hear other people's suggestions. I mean, you know, I get terrible shit for the fact that I have been forced myself to be really noisy, and that I have done things like come and give talks when you can see I'm a nervous public speaker. You know, my hand is trembling. I get to a bit in the middle and I think, oh my God, it sounds so boring, just hurry up. But I kind of I've carried on doing it because it's, you know, I just hope that enough people hear and start to question and speak up to their MPs and their AMs and to the local journalists and to the national media, and that they try and, you know, make this into the news. And I think, you know, I think there is a huge groundswell of people out there who do care about rule of law, and they do care about the fact that it's not okay to commit massive fraud, and they do want to hold power to account. And so I believe in people essentially, and that, you know, as I say, one day this all will come out.
You have had an astonishing amount of personal abuse as a result of what you've done, possibly more than anyone engaged in this whole affair. What would be your advice to anyone who wants to speak out and is concerned about the fact that there are some nasty people? Some bloody nasty people.
You know what, the only thing which kind of keeps you going is the fact is that the nastier and the more personal and the kind of crueler it gets in the way they try and take me down, it just shows that they've run out of actual arguments. So they don't actually have any evidence to fling in the face of this reporting. So they have to be sexist and misogynistic and nasty. That's all they've got left. So that I suppose, that, you know, I try to use that to fuel me onwards. they're getting more and more desperate.
We think we have some roving microphones. Do we have? We have one lady there and another there. If anyone has a question, I'm afraid I think we can only take questions from the ground floor rather than the upstairs floor. You can ask in English or Welsh. We have headphones because I'm going to have to say my Welsh is pretty rocky. But yes, any questions, please put your hand in the air, and otherwise I'll just keep asking questions. Yes, there's a gentleman here at the front. If you feel like identifying yourself, then by all means. If you don't want to, then, you know.
Okay, my name is Leighton Andrews, and this is the first time I've been in this chamber for 3.5 years. I wanted to ask you, Carole, about the international collaboration on the journalistic side, because you have rightly linked this to Trump and the billionaires who support him. And one of the things that I've learned recently in doing some work has been that the replacement of the North American Free Trade Treaty has clauses in it that effectively stop the countries that take part in that over-regulating, whatever that might mean, Facebook and Google and big tech. And so if we were heading towards a North American trade deal, if Brexit happens, you can imagine that those regulations, the ability to tax Facebook and Google, would be some of the first things that would be jettisoned. So what are your, you've had contact with the New York Times and others. Is there now a kind of global media coalition around these issues?
There's definitely much more. I mean, there's much more interest and engagement, I think, internationally in the big tech platforms. Leighton, you've got a book coming out, haven't you? I actually messaged Leighton on Twitter this morning going, I need some figures about local newspapers, the decline of local newspapers. This is quite funny. But what is really interesting about it is that it is Britain actually which has really led the way in trying to hold the tech giants to account. We've actually done more here than any other country in the world. And it's amazing. They've just refused to acknowledge us. Mark Zuckerberg, if he came to Britain, if he landed in Britain on his private jet or any British territory, he risks being arrested because he refused to come to Parliament. I mean, it's a kind of extraordinary situation when you think this is like the richest people in the world, one of the richest companies. And he can't even travel to parts of it. And I think there is, I don't know if I'd go as far as collaboration, but I think actually there is definitely now at least a community of journalists who are all trying to pursue this, and that's important.
Yes, there's a gentleman there.
I feel really bad, by the way, because I've banished my family to upstairs so they didn't distract me. Sorry about that. Give them a wave. Hi! You can semaphore a question if you like.
Hi. Actually, it's more of a sort of a comment rather than a question. I saw Leighton on TV this morning discussing the amount of spending that had gone on was it the last 12 months from the Conservatives?
Last week of the Brexit referendum.
No. In the last 12 months from the Conservatives. It was about 300 grand, was that about right?
Yes.
So that's in 12 months. And there was £675,000 injected in the last few days of a campaign compared to 12 months. £675,000 doesn't sound like a huge amount of money in advertising spend. When you put it in context like that, you suddenly realise just how much money it actually is.
And where is the money coming from? There is this idea that this is hedge fund money, Crispin Odey, whoever.
It was the Votely
available.
Yeah, the Votely funders there's a lot of hedge fund money which they all put in. I think was it Crispin Odey? He put in £100,000 and he made It wasn't billion, was it? Was it 300 million?
I think. There's that great. What was that great quote he had? The dawn had gold in its mouth.
He said, they say, morning like this, the Italians have a phrase, la mattina dell'oro or something. The morning that has gold in its mouth.
Yeah.
And it was. It's pretty bad. And there's this amazing picture of. Because the other thing is, there was this really interesting investigation into what they did by Bloomberg, actually. And one of the things they looked at is that, so Nigel Farage, do you remember how on the night of the vote, Do you remember? So 10 o'clock, the polls closed, and Nigel Farage put out a statement, and he said, well, we gave it our best shot, but I'm afraid we appear to have lost. You know, I'm happy to concede, but we gave it a good go. And what happened then? Sterling shot up in value. It was like, okay, yeah, the markets are kind of recovering. And then what happened? I think it was at about 1 o'clock that the first result from Sunderland came in. And that first result from Sunderland, which was, and it came out for leave, and the pound from this artificial high plunged like that. And that moment is when the hedge funds made their money. And then there's this extraordinary photo which came out, which is, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's a screen, and it's showing the pound plunged. And there's Nigel Farage is standing next to it. And Nigel Farage, the man who wanted to take back control for Britain. And he's pointing at the screen, going, as the pound plunged. I mean, the thing with this stuff is that there's a lot of this which is not hidden. You didn't even have to go looking for it. It's out there. You know, it's in public sight. It's in plain sight. And that's one of the reasons why I do think that in years to come, when we get the public inquiry into this, as we will one day, you know, with the Iraq war, it took years, but we did have that inquiry in the end. When that comes, I think we're going to be astonished looking back and realising just how blatant, how obvious, how out in the open it was, but how there was somehow this feeling that it was wrong to question the legitimacy of the referendum. That's what I've been told by senior Labour politicians. So we can't question the legitimacy of the referendum, even though we know it was conducted illegitimately. I mean, it's this kind of bizarre catch-22 situation.
Just to fill in on that Bloomberg investigation, that essentially about the private use of opinion polls by hedge funds, so they knew what was coming down the track before anyone else did. So, I mean, you've still got the screen behind you with the opinion poll results.
Yeah.
You know, they had lots of their own ones, so they had a very good idea what was going to come.
They knew exactly what was going to come. So Aaron Banks, when I interviewed him 2.5 years ago now, he told me how they were really, really confident. They were so confident that they had predicted the results, that they spent £80,000 on an advertisement for the Daily Telegraph on June the 24th, congratulating Nigel Farage. I mean, there was not a shadow of doubt. They were using this different type of polling, which was social media sentiment analysis, essentially. It's what hedge funds do. And they were convinced they were going to win. And so the kind of Farage is, oh yeah, but he didn't believe it, and that's why he conceded at 10 p.m. I mean, really?
I mean,
But why has he never been asked that question? I mean, it goes back to this thing of like, Nigel Farage, you know, you know, he won't answer my questions, but nobody has actually asked him these questions. There's been no mechanism to hold him to account. I mean, that needs to happen in the EU, which is the legislature that he's in. But also, you know, we're in this situation, Dominic Cummings, the man whose strategy is, you know, creating the master plan for what's happening next. He's in contempt of Parliament. So he's walking around Parliament. We see him, you know, on the news, and he is in contempt of it. He's refused to answer the committee's questions. I mean, this is nuts, and we cannot think, we know we can't pretend this is normal. And the thing is that we've been battered down so much. This is the sort of process of normalisation that we expect them to get away with it. And that's where I think we have to hang on to our outrage and indignation. I think that's really powerful.
I've been asking lots of questions. Anyone? I can keep going.
Oh, yes, there's a lady here in the middle.
Oh, sorry, there's one behind me as well. Sorry.
Yes, there's a lady here, and then maybe after her we can have the behind you.
Oh, it's so learned, isn't it?
Hi, I'm Ellen Jones, and I'm the presiding officer of this assembly, and I'm the one who's taken the flak from the Brexit Party and the Tories, actually, for you having a platform here this afternoon. Can I just ask, you mentioned, of course, that electoral law isn't working for democracy now. We're going to have a UK general election in the near future. It's probably not possible to change the law in the short term for that purpose. But what are the major parts of electoral law that you think need to be changed as quickly as possible to ensure that we protect our democracy for the future?
So thank you very much. I watched that clip yesterday on YouTube of you being attacked in this chamber for the fact that I was invited, and thank you very much for sticking up for me. And I mean, actually, the Electoral Commission has done a big report onto this as well. And so what I mean, it's just this thing of that the whole thing is that with the technology, in elections before, there was, you know, it was quite easy to police the spending limits, and you could see the leaflets and you could see the TV ads and you could add it up and it wasn't difficult. But it is just this thing now that there's just, you can just pour this money into Facebook and to Google, and you can set up kind of fake campaigns, nobody knows who they are, and they can pour money in. And so it means there's no accountability at all. And I mean, for me, yes, we need those. We need absolutely rapid and complete overhaul of all of those laws. But I actually go beyond that, because I think Facebook is a foreign company, and its chief executive has refused to come to Britain and answer to our lawmakers. So I see no reason why it can possibly have this massive role in our elections when it is beyond the reach of our laws. I mean, I think it should be nowhere near our politics and our elections, and I think we really have to seriously look at a moratorium on it ahead of any election.
We have behind us, yes, sir.
Thank you. I wonder how much of this is our own fault. The internet is a new phenomenon, 30 years old or less, and instead of giving us the opportunity to see a million perspectives from around the world, we seem to be retreating into our own little comfort zones with our own friends, so that our already set opinions are just being reinforced, and we are missing that great opportunity of hearing other points of view. I wonder, have you any comments to make about that?
Yes, I think that's a really, really key thing. It was identified, I think, about 10 years ago or something, of the filter bubble, that essentially the more that you see one kind of thing on the internet and where your interests are, the more that you see more of that. And that's also the same as well on Facebook's feed, etc. And we know we can see where this is leading in terms of what's happening in this polarization which has happened, and it's, you know, we can all see how worrying it is what's happened in Britain, and how much that's been exacerbated by the referendum, and how kind of poles apart we are, and again I think it is. There's again a duty and a responsibility of the technology companies to address that, and for us to force these things, to force them to look seriously at these issues, because we know that they don't do it voluntarily, and that's the kind of the big learning, really.
You have to think, so self-regulation is not succeeding in this space.
Yeah.
Any other questions before? Yes, oh, look, we have a lady right at the front.
Hello. I'd like to thank you first, Carole, for all the work that you do, and I think I speak for quite a lot of people in this country in doing that. So, but I have a question as well. My name's Sheila from Cardiff for Europe, a campaigning group, and there are many such groups across the country I'm sure you're aware of. It's a quick question really about whether or how much confidence or hope or faith that you've got that when we do get another referendum, we are a bit wiser to these methods that you've spent a lot of your time investigating, and whether we could expect that a second referendum could be fairer in some way. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair question?
So I mean, I kind of, who knows whether there would be another referendum, but no, I have no confidence in, There's more scrutiny now. We're more alive to the possibilities of cheating. There now is, post-Cambridge Analytica, Facebook has rolled out certain transparency tools. But it's like, you know, it's the way that the baddies are always just one step ahead of the regulations.
You're not putting much trust in Nick Clegg, then?
Oh, Nick Clegg. Oh. Don't even get me started. It's like, oh.
That's an error.
He was our Deputy Prime Minister, and I think he finds it very, very painful. What I see from Nick Clegg is utter denial about the role of Facebook in the referendum. He has taken the money, and it does eat his conscience, and that is why when I saw him at an event and asked him a question, he got very, very cross with me and called me a conspiracy theorist. And I know that that is the surefire sign that somebody's run out of arguments.
I did a talk a little while ago about money laundering in a sixth form college, and there was a bloke who was sitting in the back row, and he didn't say anything for the entire hour, and then at the end, when I was just thinking I've escaped from this, he put his hand up and he goes, "If you know all this, why aren't you doing it?" And now you must be one of the most knowledgeable people in the UK, if not the world, about how to game a political system. So clearly you're an optimist, otherwise you'd be out there selling your knowledge as a consultant, right? I mean, you must be optimistic.
Am I optimistic? I mean, so Oliver has written this brilliant book called Moneyland. I urge everybody to read it. And it's a really, really profoundly depressing read. And, you know, I thought the kind of elections thing was bad. And then you read Oliver's book and you're like, oh no, right, so it's all really bad. And basically it's about how the British state has set up this machinery and structure to enable kleptocrats, thieves, criminals from across the world to use Britain to launder their money and hide their cash and all the rest of it. And and you were sitting outside shaking your head about the NCA, the National Crime Agency, earlier. I mean, the regulators are so weak. The regulators are so weak, and it actually kind of scares me in some ways, because I think there are some real baddies out there. And yeah, it's a bit chilling. But optimism, yes, sorry, optimism. Yes. So, but on the other hand, nothing hard is easy, if you see what I mean. And I do think that Wales is a really, you know, this was where trade unionism was born. I mean, you know, we know that the coal mines, you know, there's all sorts of terrible things. We don't send children down the mines anymore, do we? Things do, you know, we can make change, but that is about, you know, this sort of solidarity and all of us standing up and demanding change. But it just might take a long time, I think. And meanwhile, we sort of have been harvested by these multi-billion-dollar companies which know everything about us. And but there are, you know, there are people fighting the fight, and I know that there are people here who are fighting the fight, and I think we all have to believe that we can kind of overcome.
So take-home messages: 1, buy a paper. 2, don't let the bastards keep lying to us. And 3...
Yeah, that's right. It's the thing they say, it's the sort of fundamental quote about journalism is, why is that lying bastard lying to me? And that is really, really key to kind of thinking about this whole situation, actually, and particularly when you think about Boris Johnson.
Another alumnus of the Daily Telegraph.
Yes, indeed. Yes, he was there at the same time as me.
Was he? Whose owners not only live in a tax haven, they own a tax haven.
We're done. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Carole.